Hey everyone, so today I'm going to take you through my recording and editing workflow using OBS and Davinci Resolve. I'll show you how I use two instances of OBS to record my screen and camera separately. This way I keep my options open during editing, allowing me to place my webcam wherever I want without baking it into the recording. I also show how to make the webcam a circle with a drop shadow which you can put in one corner. And both OBS and Davinci Resolve are free to use too. Before we jump in, I just want to mention that I did mess up a bit during the recording of this because I forgot to resize my Davinci Resolve window, which means that just the tiny bit at the bottom has been cropped off. It doesn't really affect the tutorial though, so it wasn't worth re-recording it all again. It's frustrating because I actually have an auto hotkey script that automatically resizes the window I'm sharing to the right size for recording. So when I press the hotkey, it resizes it for me automatically, but still I forgot. I'll link to that script down below if you're interested though. Anyway, let's get started. So what I tend to do is I have two OBS instances running. When you open the second one, it'll warn you saying that there's already one open. Just ignore that. You can continue through and open two instances. So I have one instance recording my screen, the screen I want to capture. So in this case, I put it on the right screen, but normally it'd be the center screen. And that's also recording my audio, my microphone. And I have the other instance, which is recording my webcam. And importantly, this is also recording the audio from the same microphone because we're going to use that to sync the tracks together quite easily. So what we're going to do, we're going to say start recording on one. Now, importantly, you've got to wait a couple of seconds, more than 1 second before doing the second one. Now, the reason for that is when this writes to a file, it will store it with a timestamp, and the timestamp has seconds in it. If you quickly go start recording within the same second, then when it writes the files, that they'll overwrite each other because it's in the same directory. So when you do start recording on each, just give it at least a second between each one. And then I would record the video. So over here on my right screen, normally it would be the center screen, but because I'm recording me recording, so I'm showing OBS, I've changed it so it's my right screen. But I would do the demo here. So for example, I've just randomly opened up Visual Studio for this demo. This is the markdown files for my podcast show notes. So like the most latest episode was, and I'm just talking now just so it's filling some time so we can see the editing workflow, was a live panel discussion. So this was the first time I've ever done a live podcast recording with an audience. We had a panel of speakers, an open conversation about software development. So that was quite cool. The previous episode was with James and we're talking about serverless and AWS and .NET. The one before that, this was a bit mind-blowing. We had Mads Torgersen, Dan Roth and Scott Hunter on. And we were talking about all sorts like Blazor, C#, 12 interceptors, C# 13, and then various other things. So there was quite a bit of imposter syndrome in that recording. It was quite surreal being in a room with Mads, Dan and Scott. Right, so I've just spoken a bit, so just to demo me doing a bit of recording. So now I'm going to click stop and stop here. And then we'll move over to looking at editing these files. So OBS will output two files. Now ignore the third file because this is the recording I'm doing right now. So it's these two that we're interested in. And if you note the file size, the bigger one is going to be your webcam. So I tend to rename this to camera. And then the smaller one is obviously going to be your screen. So I'll rename this to screen. I would then typically copy these files to a folder for that particular video. But because this is a demo, I will just leave them here. So next, if you open up Resolve, then create new project. Let's just call it demo. And this is Resolve. This is not a Resolve tutorial. I'm explicitly showing my workflow. But the first thing I would do is go down to this section at the bottom, which is your main timeline. I don't tend to use this cut window. Then I drag on the two videos, so the camera and the screen, and I just drag it over here. I've got OBS set to 30 frames a second, which is what I want for YouTube. So I'm going to say change my timeline to match that. Then if I select both of these, so I can shift click, control A, and then right click and say create new multicam clip using selected clips. The only thing I'm going to change here is the angle sync, and I will change that to sound. Everything else is the same. Notice this, which says move source clips to original clips bin. Create. So that checkbox basically put the original clips here. So what we've done now is we've automatically, or Resolve has automatically analyzed the sound and created this multicam clip where they're both aligned, and we'll see that in a sec. So what I'm going to do is drag this onto here. The first thing I'll do is right click and say unlink clips, because if you see that when I click on one, it selects them both. I don't want that at the moment. So I'm going to right click and say unlink clips. Then I'm going to alt drag this one up. So it's duplicated it. So what you see here is both of these say angle 1. So you've got angle 1 for one of the tracks and angle 2 for the other. If we move the cursor just a bit to the right, and we're seeing the screen video here, so we know angle 1 is for the screen. So I want my webcam on top, so that's going to be this top track. I can right click and say switch camera angle to 2. So now we can see my face, which is a weird position. Let's move it. Oh no, I can never find a still where I'm not pulling a silly expression. That'll do, whatever. So now I want this to be a circle in the bottom right hand corner. So I need to drag two things onto this track, two different effects. Now I've favorited them so I can do them really, really quickly. You can find them, I think, so it's transform we want and drop shadow. And if you use this magnifying glass, you'll be able to just find them quickly. I'd recommend right clicking and adding to favorites so you've got quick access. So I'm going to drag transform onto my webcam. I will also drag drop shadow onto it. By doing that, you can see here, we've got transform and drop shadow here. So expanding transform, then what I can do is I can play around. I can move me left to right, up and down. I can change the zoom. Another thing I can do is we've got this image adjustment. So if I expand that, I can take edge rounding and take it all the way across to make that circle. So if I do zoom now, I'm zooming in and out the circle. We can see the drop shadow there, and I can change the position. It's worth pointing out that over here, we can click here to toggle, basically allowing you to drag and drop. So you've got to drop down here. You can change between transform, crop, and all these things. So if you leave it on the default transform, but just make sure that's highlighted, and then you can drag it around as well. But notice that that's dragging inside. It's not doing the same as what this is. So what this does is the same as if we go over to video, this transform basically does that same thing. We're kind of like zooming, changing the position inside the circle. And this transform, when we're over in video, this is the native transform that's on all objects. It's not an effect. So if we go to effects, what we're changing before, this is the transform that we've dragged in. So they have two different behaviors when we're doing this. The one in the effect is actually changing and moving the size of your circle. The native one in video, the native transform settings, is moving and resizing the video inside the circle. And again, I can use this to move it around. For the effects, I tend to use the same for consistency. So I'm going to copy, so on my notes, I'm going to copy this value for the X, this value for the Y, and this value for the zoom. Then I'll go over to video and make sure I've got a reasonable zoom for zooming me in and out. And then using this drag, I'm going to drag myself up a bit. Let's play a little bit. And make sure I'm nice and central. And then we're good to go. So the next thing I'll do is I will control select all three, right click again and link the clips back again. Then I will take this line here and drag up a bit just to make the audio fill the track. Now, one very important extra thing we need to do, which I almost forgot about, is the audio is currently angle 1, which is the screen. So it's from the video with the screen capture. That is not what you want, because whilst Resolve has tried to sync them up, it's not going to be a completely perfect lip sync. So when you're talking in the video, your lips might look slightly out of sync with your audio. So it's important that you make sure that the audio is the same track as your actual webcam video. So I'm going to right click here. In fact, I shouldn't have linked them together. So if I right click and unlink them, then click on this one and then right click on that, switch multicam and change this to 2. So I normally do that as one of the first things. I just forgot this time. So it's important to make sure that your audio is the same angle as your webcam, not your screen capture. So let's control click them all again, right click and link them back. And by linking them, that just means that if I click any bits, it's going to select all three, which is what we want. So the next thing is we just chop it up. So if I go, we can see at the start, there's nothing going on here. So I can't remember whether I set up this shortcut myself or if it was built in. I've set up control space to chop. So let's find that. Davinci Resolve, keyboard customizations. It's going to be under timeline, I think. Yeah, control space. So I can't remember whether I set that up myself or whether that was the default, but I would recommend that. It's a really easy shortcut to do. And then I can see where the silence is. So I can do control space. I can select this and press delete and it would just chop it down. So then I can start playing. And then if I alt scroll wheel, I can zoom in. So I can move this around. I can click through. I can just trim it down so I can chop this out, delete. And we can even see there where I did a little pause. I can chop this out. And don't be worried about these jump cuts because that's something that I was initially. And quite often, that's more noticeable, but I might actually trim it down a little bit more. And then I can get rid of this. That was more of a jump, but people don't notice. It doesn't really matter. And then if we scroll out, you can see, so I'm alt scroll wheel, we can see there's large chunks where it's silence. So I can just, I'm pretty sure I wasn't doing anything there. So I can scroll through and check. I can just control space, oops, undo, control space, click that, delete. So you can see that it's kind of like there's a jump cut, but it doesn't really matter. So my process there is I just go through and chop, 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 get rid of any uncomfortable silences and just make it as seamless as possible. I know whilst recording that if I make a mistake, I can just try that bit again. So I'm just maybe a bit careful about moving the mouse, knowing that if I start again, I don't want the mouse to be jumping around as I'm doing these jump cuts. But you quickly get used to that, just not moving your mouse when you're not actively doing something on screen. Then once I've gone through tidying all this up and I'm quite happy, my next pass is to do any zooming I want to do. So I would right click here and say add track. So that's if I scroll down with the mouse wheel, you can see there's a new track here. And I would go back and start playing again. And then another thing that I've favorited is called the adjustment clip. So if I drag this on here, what that can do, this is quite useful, is it affects all tracks below it. So it's not going to affect my webcam, but it will affect my screen recording. So I can just zoom in a bit and remember to have this selected. I can then move this around. So let's say I want to zoom in here. Remember that these might have been chopped up quite a bit. So I wouldn't want to start editing the transform for every single chopped up bit. But this adjustment clip means that I can resize this. And if I play from here, we can see it's suddenly going to zoom in. And I can resize that to match what I want. I can also do animations here. So if I want to go to here, I could go to the adjustment clip. So I've selected it. Over here, you can see these little keyframe things. I can click those two. Then if I shift and right, so that's just going to move the cursor a little bit to the right. And then I can, oh, I made a mistake then actually. Let me undo that because I was showing you me zooming in. Let me just, if I double click over here, then it's going to reset them back to 0 again. So pretend I didn't zoom in initially. So this adjustment clip doesn't do anything. So if I go to the start of it now, and now click on these two, then shift and right arrow, just to move it to the right a bit, then I zoom in, then that's automatically added 2 more keyframes here. So if I then move the cursor over here and play it, we get this zooming animation. I'm just pressing space to toggle playing it and pausing it. Then, so in this pass, I would just go through zooming in where required, and that's pretty much it really. The only other thing I do is I go to this audio pane, and over here we can see, track, and I just turn on voice isolation just to get rid of a bit of background noise. And then I would go to this publish, I would be on this one, and then change the format to MP4. You can give it a location, blah, doesn't really matter. You can then click on add to render queue. It will put it over here on the right, and then you can click on like render all, and that'll render it out as an MP4. And that's it. When I'm used to that, it kind of like takes no time at all. Dragging those, if I go back to the timeline again, dragging the transform and drop shadow, pasting in my defaults. That takes a few seconds. And it just means that I can go through, and if you do this circle thing in OBS, then you're baking in this video to your recording, so you've got no control. So imagine I get to this point and find out that my face is covering up some content, then I can kind of just chop this bit. And if I alt click on this, then it's not going to select the linked bit. So if I alt click, it's only selecting this. I can then just go to effects and just move me off to the side a bit. Or I could move it up, or I could flip it to the other side and have me facing the other way. So I've got lots of options, but I've got this flexibility during edit time. It's not baked into the initial recording.